Hello there, welcome to this new video. In this one we will see how to set up your camera. So today we will focus on setting for video, and next week I will explain the settings for stop motion. Disable all your filters, switch your camera to manual mode, let's set it up. Okay, so we can start to make a quick tour of the different settings that exist in the video. We have, for example, the FPS. As we saw in the first video, the usual number of images per second is 24 FPS, so 24 frames per second. If you want more details, I invite you to watch the video by clicking on this link in the upper right. As I'm French, the European devices propose 25 frames per second, and in the United States 30 frames per second. You can also increase the number of images to 60 FPS or 100 FPS to make slow motion in the editing by lowering the speed without it going below 24-25 FPS. So if you are American and you shoot at 60 FPS, you can divide the speed by 2. Please don't shoot a video like I'm doing at 100 FPS, your file will be way too large. Then we have the shutter speed. Shutter speed is how long the sensor is exposed to light. Basically, you have a sensor in your camera. It is the element that transforms light into an electrical signal. The longer the sensor is exposed, the more it remembers what it sees. For example, if you drop water and take a picture with a high shutter speed, the droplets will be sharp because the picture was taken very quickly. On the contrary, if the shutter speed is low, the photo will be longer and you will have a smoother stream because the sensor will have recorded longer. When you shoot, you can vary the shutter speed according to your needs. The lower the shutter speed, the more blurred the movements are. The higher the shutter speed, the sharper the movements are. This is the principle of the sport mode in some cameras, but you can choose a value at random. I will explain that after the next point. We now have the ISO sensitivity. So the ISO has probably one of the simplest settings. It is the sensitivity of the sensor. The higher the ISO, the more sensitive the sensor is, and vice versa. So we could say to ourselves that it's great, that we don't need light if your camera goes to 32,000 ISOs. But there is a problem. The digital grain. The higher the ISOs are, and the more we have this grain which dirties our image. So in photo, it can pass and even give a particular look, but in video, especially with digital cameras, you have to avoid this digital grain. It is therefore necessary to light the subject while to avoid going beyond 800 ISOs. Now that we have seen these three parameters, we will see the exposure triangle, the basis in video. This is the relationship between these three settings. First of all, you have to choose your FPS. If you are shooting normally, take 25 or 30 FPS. If you want to have a possibility to slow down the video, go to 50 or 60 frames per second, at the risk of heavier files. If you want to do slow motion, go to 100 FPS. Once you have defined your FPS, you have to manage the shutter speed. Be careful, your shutter speed must be twice as high as your FPS. It's mainly the denominator that needs to be twice as big. But remember the factor 2. It's the most important. This is probably what you have heard most if you do a little video. For example, if you are shooting at 25 FPS, you set your speed to 1/50th of a second. Then set the light with the ISOs. The most important thing is to know why you are doing this. These settings correspond to what the human eyes sees. When you wave your arm, for example, it looks like it's slightly out of focus for the duration of the movement. The goal is to reproduce this motion blur. With a speed that is too high, your gesture will look too jerky, too robotic. On the other hand, if the speed is too low, your gesture will be too blurred. You need a happy medium. On the other hand, if you want to do slow motion at 124 frames per second, you can increase the shutter speed more than twice since you lose the notion of reality. This is slow motion. We want to keep the image as sharp as possible. Then we have the aperture. This is a component in your lens that lets in more or less light, but this is not its only purpose. It also has a very important role on the depth of field. The depth of field is basically the area of sharpness of the image. On this image, we can see that BB-8 is sharp, but that in front and behind him, everything is blurred. We can play with the diaphragm on the intensity of the blur. The more the diaphragm is open, the more intense the blur. That's why we hear about lenses that can open to f2.8 or f1.5. They allow a very pronounced background blur. The problem is that you want to have a nice blur, but at the same time you don't want to increase the speed, so you end up blurring on and then the other, and you don't get the perfect result. To do this, you will have to lower the brightness, and sometimes even the ISOs are not enough. So we can use a ND filter for natural density. This allows us to limit the light that enters the lens, and thus allows us to keep the desired settings for a more cinematic effect. I don't own a ND filter, so I can give you a demo. This is really the thing I need to buy. Then we have another parameter that stands out from the other because it concerns the color of the image. It's the white balance. It's measured in Kelvin. The lower the temperature, the warmer the image. The higher the temperature, the colder the image. That's all I could tell you about the different camera settings. You also have sound setting, but I think you will know how to use it. You also have the image style, but I don't think you need to know that. If you already know these few parameters, you will have a very good result. Don't forget to subscribe and see you later for more.